The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron have unveiled details of a plan to tackle undocumented migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats. On the last day of the French President's state visit to London, Sir Keir called the agreement a groundbreaking scheme that will deter others from trying to make the same journey.
So I'm pleased to announce our agreement today on a groundbreaking returns pilot. For the very first time, migrants arriving via small boat will be detained and returned to France in short order. In exchange for every return, a different individual will be allowed to come here via a safe route, controlled and legal, subject to strict security checks, and only open to those who have not tried to enter the UK illegally.
Well, President Macron of France also maintained that Brexit was a key factor behind the immigration challenges.
It's since Brexit that the UK no longer has any migratory agreement with the EU. So for people wanting to cross, there is no legal admission way, nor a way of sending people back after a crossing. And this creates and this is a pull factor to attempt the crossing, exactly the inverse effect of what Brexit promised.
Well, the refugee charity Care for Calais called it a grubby deal between two governments that trades human lives. The two leaders gave a news conference in London at the end of Mr Macron's three-day state visit, the first by a European Union political leader since Brexit. Earlier in the day, the pair co-chaired a summit with countries of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, looking at plans to support Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire with Russia. As part of that summit, they signed the Northwood Declaration, which would allow the UK and France to coordinate their nuclear deterrence for the first time. They also announced increased military cooperation. A joint deployable force is to be expanded fivefold to 50,000 troops. Meanwhile, more than 200 migrants have been picked up in the English Channel today. The BBC filmed video of people disembarking from a border force boat in Dover on the south coast of England. Earlier, the Coast Guard told the BBC it coordinated the response to the multiple incidents involving small boats in the Channel. Let's talk about what's being announced and what's been happening. Our political correspondent Ian Watson is in Westminster, and our correspondent Tom Simons is in Dover on the south coast. Tom, to you first, just tell us what's been happening there.
Well, look, it's a red day, as the government puts it, a day when it's quite easy to come across this body of water. The sea is flat, there's very little wind. We can actually see France so clearly over there that the migrants know this, and they know that it's a good day for them to try to get across. And across they have been coming. We have had two border force vessels packed with migrants arrive here at Dover at a base just down there where they come to the UK, and two lifeboats which don't always get used to pick people out of the sea but have been used on this occasion. And there are still people unloading or coming off the boats below me. We've seen a family with very small children. One child, a colleague here through a long lens could see, was visibly distressed. It is a dangerous way to come to this country, and they are still coming, and the numbers have been increasing this year compared to last year.
And Ian, to you in Westminster, in the light of the situation that Tom is describing day after day down on the coast, what has been announced today and how would it work?
Well, what's been announced today is a pilot scheme. Pilot scheme probably means that it's not extensive initially, although the government has been pretty much tight-lipped on the kind of numbers that this would involve, but essentially this is what's been called a one in, one out deal. So people who've come here in small boats would be returned to France, and an equal number of people in France who are legitimate asylum seekers, perhaps seeking family reunion in the United Kingdom, would come in this direction. They would come to the UK. Now, that looks as though that makes no overall difference to the figures crossing the Channel or the figures for illegal migration, but the hope of both President Macron and the Prime Minister is this would act as a deterrent effect, because some people making that dangerous journey across the Channel would know that in effect they'd be given an involuntary return ticket, and that journey would have been completely risky but without any benefit whatsoever. So they would hope that that would deter them in the long run. Other people would be allowed into the UK by legitimate means. The idea is then also to act as a deterrent to people who are coming into Europe in the first place and then making that journey across Europe to the Channel. According to President Macron, around a third of migrants who've come into Europe are bound for the UK. So that is basically what they're after, but it is a pilot scheme for a number of reasons. First of all, there are other countries in the EU that are not keen on this at all. They're worried that if people go back to France from the UK, they might then be sent back to their initial point of entry, to Italy or Spain, for example. So they are raising their objections with the European Commission. Secondly, it is only a pilot, so we're not quite sure how success will be measured and whether the numbers really will ramp up as the Prime Minister hopes they do.
Ian, thank you. Tom, back to you. I mean, you mentioned that these figures are record-breaking for this year. Just talk us through the numbers so far. We're only in July.
Well, in July, let me just give you this 1 week. So in the last, I think, 8 days, we started at the beginning of today with 695 people coming to the UK in small boats across the Channel. That's quite a low number, actually. Some of the worst days of this have seen more than 1,000 people coming. And these boats supposed to hold about 20 people, sometimes hold 50 or 60 people crowded on. So that's the beginning of the day. We think we've probably seen 300, maybe 400 people coming across, and it's not over yet. As I said, there are still people who are coming off the lifeboat that's down in the harbour behind me. And you can be sure that if there's another red day when the conditions are good tomorrow, there will be more people on the beaches, probably planning their route across now for tomorrow morning. So that's really what the government, both sides of the Channel, the two governments, are up against.
Tom, thanks very much. Tom Simons there down on the coast in Watson, here in London, in Westminster. Thank you both. Now, we've been getting a range of responses since the deal was announced in the last couple of hours. The leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage, gave his thoughts on the immigration challenges.
There is a massive global problem, but why don't we, and the reason we voted Brexit, why don't we make sure we don't make the same mistakes as the European Union and many others?
But you don't think we need to work with other countries on this?
No, we don't need to work. The European Union have a stupid policy that I warned in 2015 would lead to millions coming. It has. Why should we pay for their problem? We voted in a referendum to leave their problem.
Let's talk to Tony Smith, who is the former head of the UK Border Force and a former government advisor on immigration legislation. Tony Smith, thank you for being with us. What do you think of this?
I think the jury's still out, to be honest. I mean, the devil will be in the detail. He's right to say this is groundbreaking in my experience, and I worked in the Home Office for a great many years on arrangements for returns of asylum seekers. It's the first time that we've ever been able to persuade France to take back failed asylum seekers. I don't think it's anything to do with Brexit, therefore, because they weren't taking them back when we were in the EU. Now they're saying they're going to take some back. But the figures that I've heard being bruited were 50 a week, which is about 2,500 a year, weighed against 44,000 crossings last year. So if you do the maths, that it's more like 17 in and 1 out.
Yes, I was looking at those figures, 21,000 arrivals in small boats in the first 6 months of this year alone. How does this 1 in, 1 out theory benefit anybody?
Well, the idea is that, you know, if we start to detain people when they come off the boats in Dover and we start to send them back to France, then we send a message across the Channel that you don't need to come anymore because you're going to end up back where you started from. But the difficulty with that is if we're only going to be detaining a very small percentage, 6%, then the other 94% are going to continue to come through as they do now, aren't they? And we'll end up in the UK, in the asylum system, and in quite a lot of them in a hotel. So if you're trying to deter migrants from making the crossing, this is a step in the right direction, perhaps not a big enough step. There may be other things that we're going to need to do to discourage them from crossing.
What other things do you have in mind?
Well, I was a fan of the Rwanda plan that this government abolished before it even got off the ground, but that would have enabled us to do the same thing with people coming off the boats in Dover, but send them directly to Rwanda. and they could stay there and they could claim asylum there and they would not be sent back to the country they were fearing persecution from. That deal was done, but unfortunately it never really got off the ground because it was declared illegal by a number of legal challenges over 2 or 3 years, and so it never happened. But I think we can't, we need to know we can't control what the French do. We can't control what the EU do. We can control what we do. And if we can come to an agreement where we start to see people being removed from this country as illegal entrants when they arrive, then that might be the message we're looking for. But I think without that removal as deterrent, this particular deal isn't going to go far enough, as far as I can see at the moment.
Tony Smith, former head of the UK Border Force and former government advisor on immigration legislation, thank you for your thoughts.